Hello, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guests may not represent those of the host of the station. Folks, I am so honored and excited to have with me today a very special guest. Hopefully I will say his name correctly, David Tereshchuk. Am I saying that right, David?
You are saying it absolutely right, Betsy. That's perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. As a journalist working mainly in broadcast media, but also for magazines and newspapers, the New York Times, The Guardian, New Statesman, David spent 2 decades with British commercial television reporting, producing, and making documentaries before moving to the U.S., where he worked for ABC, CBS, CNN, Discovery, A&E, and the History Channel. His earliest work included coverage at the guerrilla war in Northern Ireland, especially in the Third World. Since 2012, he has been a producer and correspondent for PBS, concentrating on ethical issues. David broadcasts a weekly public radio dispatch of media criticism, The Media Beat, and writes an online column by the same name. David is a graduate of Oxford University. He's a U.S. citizen since 2012 and lives in New York City and Ireland, and is author and writer of this awesome, phenomenal book, My Life as an Unaffiliated Reporter, A Question of Paternity. I want to welcome David Tereshchuk to Chatting with Betsy.
I'm very happy to be with you. It's a good pleasure to be with you on your show, Betsy.
Well, thank you. I'm so honored to have you come on. I have to be honest with you, David. My audience knows I'm a Jersey girl, so I just say it as it is. When I started doing this show, I never thought I would be interviewing people that have been in the news and that are famous. So it is an honor, really, for me to have you on, because I started out interviewing caregivers, and I really have expanded. So thank you for coming on, and always thanks to Lisa Warren of Lisa Warren PR. And David, I loved your book. I really thought it was kind of like a thriller to me. I couldn't put it down. And I always ask the authors to come on, what motivated you to write your book?
Well, Betsy, I think I've been living something of a paradox much of my life. As you pointed out, I'm an international reporter. It's been my job, put it at its simplest, just to go around the world asking people questions and getting answers, often getting answers from people in power who don't particularly want to be put on the spot and asked difficult questions, but I ask them, and I get the answers for the public record. But here in my own personal, private life, there's been one question that I never got an answer to, which is, who is my father? That's why the book is called A Question of Paternity. Questions are my line of work, if you like. And the question of paternity has been a particularly troubling one, because I never knew who my father was, and for a long, long time, my mother wouldn't tell me. And the book is consequently an account of my search, my attempt to get an answer, and the difficulties of actually pinning it down in the end. It's a long story. I'm afraid it's all of 412 pages long, so readers may find it a little weighty, but it's an honest attempt to follow the entire course of my life and my career, and the difficulty of getting a personal mystery solved.
I think it's very normal, David, for people to wonder who their parents are. especially when it's been a secret. And then you wonder, okay, why is it a secret? Like, why is it so secretive? And in your book, I have to say, by the way, I got your book. I didn't think I was going to get it in time to read, but I did, and it went by pretty fast. I read your book.
I'm glad to hear that.
Very quickly, because I couldn't put it down. You blend your search for your father in with your fascinating career. So this is a must-read, folks. I have to say that. And I'm going to digress here. I love your book cover. How did you come up with this book cover that is different from any book cover I ever saw?
We have my publishers to thank for that. The book itself is made to look a bit like an airmail envelope. I think you'll probably get that reference, that allusion.
Yes.
And the publisher is Envelope Books, and they have a simple company motto. They say, what is a book except a letter from a writer to a reader? And that really appealed to me. And their house style, if you like, for book design is to make every book they publish look like one kind of an envelope or other. I mean, in this case, in my case, appropriately enough, for all the international reporting that I've done, it's an airmail letter, and that's the device around it. It's blue with a set of stripes around the edges.
Yes, and the stamps on there. I thought it was very creative, very eye-catching, which is what you want, something eye-catching for people to say, wow, that book looks interesting, let me pick it up. Getting back to your finding out who your father was, why did your mom keep it a secret?
Well, when she finally got to tell me about it, we never got to talk about it for a long time. I think as a child I was warned away from the subject. I don't remember ever being told that this was something we don't talk about. I think it was just made clear in the way that you can make things clear to a child without actually saying it, that certain topics are off the agenda. They're not to be talked about. And that was true, and I accepted it, and I didn't make any efforts to challenge it at all as a child, and right through my teens and into my adulthood. I think I internalized it by regarding it as unimportant. I thought it didn't really matter. I was my own man, if you like, as a young man. I thought it's of no significance who my father was. I don't care. But eventually it got to be an untenable position for me. It's something that you can perhaps tell yourself, but I think in my case I just ended up not really believing it, not believing myself and my own self-delusion. And there came a time when I wanted to get the thing cleared up, and there were various reasons for that, but essentially my curiosity overcame me, and I pressed my mother. And it wasn't until I was in my late 40s, beginning of my 50s, that she gave me an account. And it was a stunning account. She told me that at the age of 15, she was raped by a Catholic priest. And then that was why there started this essentially a lie about me that I had internalized. My grandmother was in charge of our household. My grandfather had died some years before, and my grandmother had already 9 children who survived. She gave birth to 10, and the idea was that my family would pass me off because of the shame and scandal of this. Having a 15-year-old pregnant teenage woman in the household. Instead of that being the story, the story that was passed around was that I was the last of my grandmother's children. I'm not sure how they thought they could possibly get away with that fiction, since my grandmother was well past childbearing age by this time. And as I say, my grandfather was not on the scene at all. He died sometime before. But that was the story, apparently, and so I had this something of a confusion. I called my grandmother Mam, which is this. I was brought up on the border between England and Scotland, and Mam is the Scottish equivalent to American Mom. I clearly thought of her as my mother, and my real mother I thought of as being my elder sister. I called her by her first name, Hilda. And in fact, I did all throughout her life. That never changed. She was Hilda to me. And I was going to say my brothers, bigger brothers, but they weren't brothers. They were actually my mother's brothers, and they were in fact my uncles. But to me, they were playmates, and they seemed like my brothers. That was the fiction, and I don't think I ever came to a sort of stunning realization that this was not really the truth. I think I just came to a gradual awareness that my mother was indeed my mother, and these young men, as I knew them growing up, were in fact my uncles. But all that internalization, that assimilation of the fiction was the framework for my growing up early on, and I felt confused, I think. I was very unsure of myself. In a way, I think because I didn't know whose I was, I didn't have a very strong idea of who I was. I was nervous and anxious and very withdrawn as a child.
I have to ask you this, David, because in your book, as I'm reading it, and you're very forward in talking about that you had an alcohol problem. And I'm thinking to myself, and you went on these amazing adventures with your career, dangerous situations you were in at time. And I was thinking to myself, I have to ask David this question, and you would understand it because you're a journalist. Did you ever feel that you had to prove your worth to people, like you were worthy to be here? And is that what attracted you to some of these, I would say, excitements, that adrenaline rush, or that you had something to prove?
I'm not sure how it all knitted together, but I have to report that yes, I did feel that the rush of adrenaline that I got from my job was an appropriate reward for my being as ambitious as I was. I did take risks, and I have to say that you're right to suspect that alcohol may have played a part in that. I found one of those useful attributes that alcohol had for me to begin with, at least. I mean, later on it became a terrible burden. But to begin with, alcohol enabled me to be, I'm not going to say courageous or brave, but I think it encouraged me to be reckless. And I took risks that I don't think I would have done if I was stone cold sober. And the interesting thing about my career is that I suspect that, I don't suspect, I know for a fact, because it's a matter of record, that sometimes the riskier jobs that I did and the way that I got my stories, often at great cost to myself, potentially at least, I did take risks with my life at times, pretty stupid risks on reflection. But they did have the effect of rebounding to my credit professionally. And for a while, it was, I would have told you that I was having the best life imaginable for a young man. But what I didn't know, of course, that I was suffering from the disease of alcoholism, which, as you know, is a progressive disease. And it goes a certain way that if it's not treated, then it's inevitable that it will get worse and worse. And, in many cases of untreated alcoholism, the patient dies. and I had a narrow escape. I think I ended up getting sober when I was in my 40s, and here I am, still alive in my 70s. So I'm glad for that turn in my life. I'm very grateful for it.
Yes. I'm going to go back in time when you were younger. I want the audience to know, especially the young people today, when somebody was pregnant back then in the 40s, that was considered shameful. It was an embarrassment to the family. My dad told me that, my dad was born in 1924, that girls were sent away when they were pregnant and not married.
Indeed, yeah. My mother was sent away 200 miles for me to be born. And this was in 1948. Things hadn't changed very much in terms of unwed pregnancy, as it was called then. And yes, the terms that were used in England and Scotland at that time were ones that dogged me through my life. I was a bastard. I was illegitimate. I was born out of wedlock. That seemed to be in itself a label that was very, very negative. And as you say, yes, a matter of great scandal for the family. That was why the fiction began in my family, instigated by my grandmother, and that led to all the uncertainty, that cloud of uncertainty, as I think of it, under which I grew up initially.
I know it seems kind of like to people nowadays, thinking that your mom was your sister, but that was not really uncommon. I've heard of other stories of similar situations where people thought that their mom was their sister, and then they found out later that was their mom. In the beginning, when I was...
Indeed, I heard Eric Clapton, the guitar genius, who's British, telling me that it was exactly the same for him in his household, and I've heard the same said about Jack Nicholson, the American actor. It's not unusual. You're quite right.
Yeah, and when I was reading your story about you're talking about your mom, I thought about my mother-in-law. She told me, David, that she was working as a church secretary, and a priest tried to attack her. And this is in the 40s. And she got away. I don't remember if she told her mother or not, or she just kept it to herself. But we happened to be drinking wine one night, and she happened to tell me. I don't know if she ever told anybody that story, because back then you did not repeat that. You didn't say things about that. And the whole scandal with priests and other clergy abusing children, it's a well-known fact. There was a very big scandal in New Jersey also having to do with
and
priests.
In Boston and in other parts of the United States, and in Ireland and in Britain and in Australia and African countries also. The list goes on, yes. It's a major feature of Roman Catholic Church history of the late 20th century and early 21st, I'm afraid. And I really thought that I was part of that phenomenon, if you can use something like a neutral word about it. An outrage, I think, is what most people would regard it as being. And that was something that really engaged me when my mother told me about it. As a journalist, of course, and oddly enough, I was a journalist who at the time concentrated considerably on religious and ethical matters. And I was really prompted to get a hold of the story, and rather like a dog with a bone, and make sure that I found out who this sexually abusive abuser of children my father apparently was. So I had to find out who he was.
And I can understand that. I mean, just wanting to know your genetics People want to know their medical
that,
history.
and also explore this terrible crime that had been committed. It was, I think Americans would call it statutory rape. My mother was 15 when she got pregnant. By almost any standard in most Western countries, that would be regarded as a criminal offense.
How did you know where to even begin? Because this is, you're going back many years, and to find out information about your mom and about the priest and taking you down to other areas to find out who your father was. Like, I don't even know if I would know where to start.
It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. Yes, you're right to suspect that. I got a lot of help. Journalists do, of course, when they've got apparently intractable mysteries to unravel. I actually, because of that specialty that I mentioned of reporting on religion and ethical matters, I had actually quite a lot of contacts in the Roman Catholic Church, in Ireland, in Scotland, in England, and one of them, in fact, was in America. But the priest I was getting this help from was something of a specialist himself in the matter of what he called erring priests who go off track and commit offenses. His job was to deal with those kinds of cases in his own diocese in America. But he had very good contacts with the Roman Catholic Church worldwide because of this specialty of his own. And he was able to help me with regard to the diocese in England, where the priest who, according to my mother, engendered me, fathered me in one sense only. That diocese was one that he was able to do some investigating on my behalf, and he reported back to me rather disappointing results. In fact, that he, in all his work and in all his very close and deep contacts, could not come up with any priest who matched the description that my mother had given. But on the other hand, later on, I managed to find out, with again help from another quarter, a group of people which is now enormous, a group of people who just call themselves COP, Children of Priests. And they adopt that label into the name coping. They are people who are coping with this background for their own birth. They're children of priests. They call themselves Coping International, and that group was able to get from the diocese where my father apparently would have been a priest. They found a possible candidate, and we traced his career. Interestingly, he left our village on the border between England and Scotland around about the time I was born, and he disappeared from church records. But then he reappeared in church records a couple of years later under a slight change to his name. My mother had said that the man who raped her was called Father Francis, and this father reappeared, this clerical father, reappeared as Father Leo, but his full name was in fact Father Francis Leo. He started using his middle name after this shift, this geographical shift in his location. So that started to look very much like a prime suspect to us as we searched, myself and the Coping International people and other friends who were in contact who were helping me. This looked very promising as a likely culprit, if you like. And then genetics entered the scene. DNA matches, which are now possible, as you know, on a worldwide scale, because of all these genealogical websites online, like Ancestry.com and MyHeritage.com and all the others. My DNA sample was logged with all of these sites, about a dozen of them, in fact, and my DNA was being compared with something like 11 million people's DNA. And eventually, one of the results that came up very clearly was that this candidate that we had in mind as the most likely suspect could not possibly have been my father, because there was no match whatever with my DNA when we found close relatives of him posting their DNA on these sites. So that was the end of that line of inquiry.
That is, you did a lot of testing on these, I call them DNA websites, and they're always changing. Like, they're always updating their
Absolutely.
Information.
They grow and grow, and there are more comparisons to be made. Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I did Ancestry DNA a few years ago, and I wasn't shocked. My mother's like, "Why are you doing that? You know who your parents are and grandparents." And I said, "Well, yeah, but I don't know Daddy's side that well." But and they do update and change. So with all these DNA tests that you did you? Well, I know the answer. You could tell the audience. Did you find a possible match that sent you into a different direction?
Well, more interesting and tantalizing hints came along. It seemed that I was finding matches, or matches were being found for me, with people who lived in Germany, who were German, particularly the Lower Saxony region of Germany. And that, of course, opened up a wholly new possibility. And I don't want to give too much of the book away, but
right.
It's significant that on the fringes of our large village or small town in which I grew up initially, there was a prisoner of war camp from World War II. I was born 3 years after that war ended, but there was still a POW camp, a prisoner of war camp, on the fringes of the village, and it had German and Italian prisoners in it. And because the war was over, they nonetheless were still there. They were not repatriated until the year of my birth, in fact. And many German prisoners, in particular, were able to not exactly stroll around the village, but they had a certain degree of freedom. They had to observe a curfew, but they actually became quite a considerably useful part of the labor force, because many men in the village, of course, had gone to war in World War II, and many had not come back. So the labor force was supplemented considerably by these German prisoners of war, and it's perfectly possible that my mother may have been in association of some kind, and perhaps even had a sexual relationship with one of these prisoners. But we couldn't find any definite proof of that, just more and more tantalizing hints.
That was also a disgrace back then. If your mom being associated with the prisoner of war, the enemy,
Absolutely.
right?
My family had many male members who fought in the war. Indeed, my grandmother lost her eldest son, my mother's eldest brother, in the war. 3 days before the end of the war, in fact, a shocking loss for my grandmother. I remember she took it whenever she talked about it, she was very close to tears. Obviously, I'm assuming that in many ways that was her favorite son, her firstborn, and she was destroyed by. I'm speculating here, but I know she took very hard the loss of that particular son. And so I imagine, I can only imagine, as I say, I've never had my mother's commentary about this, but I would imagine that it was an especially scandalous and shameful thing for her to have been associated with a German prisoner of war.
Yes. Did you see later on things from your mom's point of view of why she kept it a secret, but yet she was probably encouraged to give you up, but she kept you?
Absolutely. My mother was I think even at the age of 15, had a kind of determination. She told me she came under a lot of pressure to have me aborted, which was, of course, still a crime in Britain. It wasn't for a good many years after that. It wasn't until then that abortion became legal in Britain. But they at that point, she said that they didn't know how to set about achieving an abortion, and anyway, she was dead set against it. She was determined to have me. I was glad that she could tell me that, and I sort of wanted to thank her for not aborting me, which felt a very strange thing to put into words. But she just took it as read that she was going to have me, and she wanted to have me, and she said to me, I never regretted it for 1 minute, David.
That's awesome to hear that. My dad, he was very, how can I put it, very blunt, and he told my younger brother, I have a brother 6 years younger than I am, he told my brother, I wanted you, but your mother didn't. She tried to abort you. I think that's a most terrible thing to tell a child that. If you know that, just keep it to yourself. But to think, well, my mom didn't want me, but my dad did, and then in your situation, you didn't know who your dad was, and then, you know what your mom went through, that's got to be really tough to deal with as a child. I'm going to shift gears here, David, because I want you to tell the audience, how did you become a television journalist? Well, I'll go even before that. How did you become a graduate of Oxford? Because I know you have to be very smart.
Well,
so you must have been a very smart lad.
I'm not sure about smartness. I had a certain kind of smartness. I think the best way of describing it was that I tested well, and that I was very scholastic at school. At high school, and I did apply myself. I was fascinated by English literature, I have to say, and I got a scholarship. I won a scholarship as a result of an examination that Oxford University held, and I think it was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me, quite frankly. I enjoyed my 3 years at Oxford enormously. And I have to say that at the same time, while enjoying what it had to offer, I also was assailed by this terrible resurgence of my childhood feelings of not knowing how I fitted in. It seemed to me that everyone at Oxford around me was much more accomplished than me, certainly richer. My family was very poor. We lived in public housing, along with the shame about my illegitimacy, so-called. I also had this terrible shame about poverty, about coming from poverty, and felt very out of place in Oxford, even though I knew that I qualified to go there, in the a really appropriate way. So to answer your question about how I got into journalism, it was actually a prescription I wrote out for myself to be a cure for this terrible sense of inferiority and a sense of not fitting in that I had at Oxford. I was so withdrawn, so shy, I think is the gentle way we had of describing it at the time, that I felt I should force myself to be outgoing, and journalism was the key. If I was going to be a reporter for the student body newspaper, which I enrolled in, I would have to go out and talk to people and ask them questions and force myself to be outgoing. And I guess it worked. I ended up being a fairly proficient journalist at the student newspaper level. I became the student newspaper's editor, and then I went into when I graduated from college, I went into journalism in London at national level. Well, actually, initially at metropolitan level, and then I graduated at national level, and then international level in television. Television was my chosen medium. I thought at the time that newspapers were a dying breed. I think I was ahead of my time, and for the wrong reason. I thought that television would kill off newspapers. It didn't, but now it looks like internet is doing a job for us, I'm afraid. So yes, my preferred medium was television, and that's how I got into it.
Well, I could tell you, David, as someone who reads the paper and still gets the paper, the newspaper, the papers are getting smaller, more costly, and they really want you to read the paper on the internet, on the digital, which I can't do because of my eyesight. I just can't do it. But that's what they encourage people to do. That's why they're making the paper smaller. But I can really understand that you wanted to cure yourself of your shyness. Now, when I tell people that I'm shy, they don't believe it because I interview people. But that's not something I would have imagined myself doing like years ago. That's for sure. But it's amazing. Like a lot of people in show business are shy off camera. Johnny Carson, they said, was very shy. Dean Martin, you would never think of these people as being shy, but they were. So I really enjoyed reading that in your story. Your mom, did she ever say that she was really proud of you, that she got to see some of your accomplishments, your work?
Yes. I mean, she didn't. I mean, she was. There was a general tone, I think, in our family that you were never supposed to be too big for your boots.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and she didn't overpraise me by any means. I mean, but I got the impression that she was. I think one of the things that impressed her most is that I sat down one time for an hour-long interview on television with the most senior cleric in all of Great Britain. Well, I should say England, really. The Archbishop of Canterbury. I remember my mother being very impressed by that, and so I guess yes, she was. I mean, I think she had some pride. She took some pride in me. That's undoubted.
I'm sure she did. What were some of your favorite interviews? I know you've had many, and it might be hard to pin some down, but.
Well, yes, it's hard to single out it, except that I guess much of my work was carried out in Africa, Southern Africa especially, as I charted the final, long-lasting end. It took forever, it seemed, for Southern African countries to win their liberation from European colonists, and the toughest struggle. The toughest struggle of all, perhaps, was South Africa and its oppressive apartheid regime, white supremacy, finally, at long last, being overcome in 1994, and Nelson Mandela becoming the new majority-elected president of that country, the first ever black president, first of several. There have been quite a few since. But he was a figure who dominated that landscape for many years. He was imprisoned by the white supremacists for 27 years, and then he came out and, as I say, was installed as president. And I had a very short interview with Nelson Mandela, which I have to say was grabbed in the way that journalists can sometimes be reduced to just grabbing, because I was not supposed to have an interview with Nelson Mandela. He was heading towards some formal sit-down interviews with the three main American news anchors at the time. That would have been, I don't know if people remember, but Dan Rather, Peter Jennings, and Tom Brokaw represented three main American commercial networks, and they were the platform on which he was supposed to be addressing the world at that critical point, just before, the very day before, in fact, the day before his election as president. His party were at pains to impress upon the world that this was going to be a peaceful transition, and confidence, financial confidence especially from Wall Street in the economy of South Africa must be reassured and maintained. And the idea was that these American networks would be the ones who interviewed Mandela. I wanted my own interview with him, and I resorted to basically ambushing him in the corridors of the hotel, and we were actually in the corridor where all the kitchen goods were stored, massive sacks of flour and huge industrial-sized cans of tomatoes, and that was the setting in which I had my 5 minutes. I think it was 5 or 6 minutes I had with Nelson Mandela. I'd give anything to have a much fuller interview with him in some notional heaven, maybe. I don't know. But for the time being, I have to be satisfied with the fact that I did actually interview for 6 minutes Nelson Mandela, the great Nelson Mandela.
Wow, that had to be very powerful. Really, a highlight for you. I'd like to ask you, are you at peace now with I don't want you to give it away because I want people to read the book, but are you at peace now with how things stand, with the knowledge that you do have about your possible father?
Well, Betsy, the truth is that as a journalist, I've always been wedded to the notion of facts. Facts are really important. And, this is it's strange to have to say that it's almost a contentious thought nowadays when, all sorts of notions like that individual who was a press advisor to Donald Trump when he was president. I remember her saying that we have alternative facts. Well, there is no such thing in my mind as alternative facts. There are facts, and they're an item of truth. And I've always been very solidly wedded to it. However, it is possible, and this is something that I've had to learn to accept over my long search for my father, that some truths may not be findable. You may not be able to get the absolute copper-bottomed, ironclad truth, the facts that you might want. And I frankly haven't got everything that I wanted. I have had to settle for just a general sense of what the truth may be. And am I comfortable with that? I'd like it to be, I would prefer to have the whole truth, but I've come to settle for what I have got. And I certainly understand my mother a lot more than I did when I began this search, even though it's been difficult at times for me to understand her. But I'm a lot more comfortable with the situation as a whole than I ever imagined I could possibly be.
Well, that's good to know. And what would you like the reader to take away from your book? I know there's many things to take away, but what would you like them to take away?
Well, I hope that I am providing a suggestion, at least, that if you happen to be in a family where there is a deep and oppressive secret, and that you're uncomfortable with it, I would suggest that it's really important to ask the questions. You know, I said earlier, I'm very fond of questions. They're the essential tool of my life. And I think it's an important message, I think, of my experience, that it is really, really important to ask questions, even when the situation seems to discourage them, because the toxicity of family secrets that so many families suffer from has to be broken apart, in my view. And the best way of doing that, breaking apart of secrecy, the tearing away of this shroud of secrecy, is to keep asking the questions.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I know I was very curious as a child, asking questions about relatives, and we weren't allowed to talk about them. We weren't allowed to mention relatives. I found out many years after the fact. I was told that my two relatives were dead when they weren't. They just happened to be in state institutions. But then you're shocked at the truth, right, when you find out the truth. So I really enjoy talking to you, David. Where can people get in contact with you, and where can people find your wonderful book?
Well, in both cases, myself and the book are available online, of course, as everything is these days. www.themediabeat.com is where you find me. The Media Beat is the name of my column and my radio broadcast, and you also find details of the book there as well, of course. A Question of Paternity, My Life as an Unaffiliated Reporter.
And I have to say, David, I listened to your Media Beat. I think people should listen to you and read your column. I think it's excellent, your book. And folks, I didn't even touch the surface of this book, but I want you to read this book. This book is a fascinating read. It is just exciting. You get an inside look of a journalist and what they go through. And it really opened my eyes to a different point of a journalist and what you all go through, the danger and the scrutiny. And it's just a fascinating read, your book. And I hope it becomes a bestseller. I could definitely see it becoming a bestseller, David. And I just want to thank you for coming on the show today. It was an honor to talk to you.
Thank you, Betsy.
You are welcome. Folks, you have heard David. David, say your last name for me.
David Tereshchuk.
Tereshchuk. My Life as an Unaffiliated Reporter, A Question of Paternity. All the information about David will be in the blog that Jeannie White, the station manager, writes and produces the show. And thank you all for listening and subscribing. And if you don't already, subscribe to Chatting with Betsy. It is for free on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Music, just to name a few. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, who's CEO of Passion World Talk Radio Network, who makes this all possible. And if you want, you can follow me on Facebook, Betsy E. Wurzel, Wurzel. And I have a support group, #Kick Alzheimer's Death Movement, if you are a caregiver. And I just want to mention next month is National Alzheimer's Month. If you are concerned about your memory, please go to your physician and get yourself checked out. And I just want to thank everyone again. I really recommend this book. I can't say enough good things about it. And if I could read this book within a week, with my eyesight, you all can. It's going to be a holiday time soon. This is a great book to give to somebody to read. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind and shine your light bright. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Bye-bye now.